there are about 70 stories of the life of Jesus known or known about. 70 different Gospels. 4 are in the Bible. The rest you can look up in the library. We have the Gospel of the Hebrews and the Gospel according to Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of the Nativity, and various other things, which are usually called the Apocrypha. That is, the Christian community says these are false Gospels. And they may have some truth in them, but they're not God's Word. It's interesting, and we'll try to see how it was he decided which ones were the legitimate 4 and which ones weren't. But here's our second main point. What does the Quran say about those scriptures that the Jews and the Christians have? Well, it does not specifically say they have changed them. I want to stress that again. It says basically 3 things. It says they have changed the words from their proper places, and goes on to illustrate how this actually happened. It didn't mean that here was a true Bible and somebody wiped out a word and he wrote a false one in. It meant he may have had the truth in front of him, but he didn't tell somebody else what it said. And that goes on even till now. To give an example, the Bible is written in 3 languages which nobody speaks today. That is, aside from a handful of people who've studied these ancient languages. They're in dead languages. It's in ancient Hebrew, not the Hebrew spoken today. It's in Aramaic. Nobody speaks it anymore. It's in Koine Greek. Nobody speaks it anymore. So that the only way to know what the Bible has to say is to ask somebody who knows these languages, and he will tell you. So that when people say they read the Bible, what they mean is they read a translation of it. And it is in the translation that this first complaint shows up in the Quran, of people who they have the truth in front of them, but they say something else. To give you one example, you have throughout the Old Testament many individuals and even objects which are called Messiah in the Hebrew. The word simply means something anointed. If you dip something in water, you pour water over it, you pour oil over it or something, you anoint it, you designate it for a purpose, you give it a name, or in the Greek the terminology is to christen. Even when a baby is traditionally given its name, they say it's christened, they put a little oil on its forehead and they give it its name. This is a very common piece of terminology. You find it all through the Bible, Messiah. But in any English translation of the Bible that you read, you'll only find the word here and there. You'll only find it in the places that seem to be pointing toward Jesus. You don't find it, for example, in the book of Isaiah, where it refers to a certain Persian named Cyrus as God's Messiah. No, they translate Messiah in these places. They say anointed one. The idea being that if they simply wrote Messiah every time, people would get a different impression as to the importance of that word. But if you only use Messiah in places that point to Jesus, and you translate it in other places, you hide from people the fact that Messiah doesn't mean anything too very special. It simply means when you name something, you choose it. When God says, that's the one. And so Messiah takes on a magic kind of a meaning. Takes on a meaning where people seem to think must mean maybe God. Yes, when you say Messiah, it means God. That's the psychology of it. And it works. Because the story is reported in the Bible how somebody asked Jesus, are you the Messiah? And he apparently said, yes. And the man said, oh, blasphemy, and he tore his garments. And people say, you see there? He claimed to be God. He said he was the Messiah. Well, think about it. If Messiah means God, then nobody can ever say it to a Jew. The Jews who are waiting for the Messiah, the day he really comes and he says, I'm the Messiah, they say, no, we have to kill you. Because when you say Messiah, it means you're claimed to be God. We're waiting for the Messiah so we can kill him when he comes, because he can't say he's the Messiah, I guess. That's the nonsense that it leads to. It's a very twisted kind of interpretation. The reason the man would be upset if somebody claimed he was the Messiah, the reason he would say that's blasphemy, is because he'd say the man's lying. He said God picked him, and I know God didn't. That's really the only thing he could have been thinking of. The word itself can't carry some meaning of divinity. But I'm digressing. That's the first complaint of the Quran, that people have something in front of them and something else is what they give out. Second point is somewhat similar to that. The Quran says they have passed over much that they have in front of them. Some things are right there and they don't mention them. They've missed them, or maybe overlooked them. One group of these things is well known, it's catalogued. It's usually called the difficult sayings of Jesus. These are the sayings that don't fit in with Christian ideas. So we don't talk about them, or we put them in a box and say, these are the difficult sayings of Jesus. As to why they're difficult, we can get to later. But as an example of this kind of thing, there was a Jesuit priest by the name of Xavier Leon Dufour, who spent his academic career researching the few words of Jesus that are reported in the Bible, and there's not very many. He wanted to discover which of these words can we be absolutely sure Jesus really said, because somebody might have put other words in his mouth years after when they wrote this story. And what was his conclusion? Very logical. He said, well, at least we can be sure of these words, and he had a collection of words. He said, we can be sure he said these words which disagree with the church. His reasoning is very sound. He says, because we know the church didn't put them there. They say the opposite to what the church says, or they're against what the church says, so the church didn't put them there. They must be left from something he really said. And nobody ever was brave enough to try to change them. Makes a lot of sense. You have to wonder why Father Dufour didn't take a second look at that and think, well, then what am I doing in the church? If I can be sure that Jesus said this and it disagrees with the church, why am I still here? He apparently didn't follow through on that thought. And the third point is, as we have talked about so far really, the Quran complains that people have attributed status to things that don't deserve the status. That this and this and this may come from God, but these things don't, and yet people put these along with the others to say, oh, this too, this comes from God. As, for example, to have the book of Jonah, which says it came from God, and to take another book which doesn't say anything of the kind and put it in here between the same covers. That's the other complaint in the Quran. There is a verse which is read from the Quran very often by missionary workers in order to try to fool Muslims on this, and possibly they don't do it in dishonesty. Some of them do, I'm sure, but others may simply have never noticed the point before. They read from the 5th surah, in the 48th ayah, the verse which says that of the Quran, that it is a book sent to confirm the truth of previous books. And so they say, you see there, it says in your book that my book is true. Well, what's interesting about that is they read half a sentence. They stop too soon. That isn't the whole verse. It's very much longer. It makes 2 more points. But the one that's relevant here is it continues on to say that the Quran is a book which confirms the truth which is in their books, and it acts as, and the Arabic word in this place is muhaimin, it acts as quality control over what is in their books. In other words, it confirms that which is true in there, and it acts as a measurement to say, but not this, or this, or this. This can't be true. It acts as a measurement of the quality of those books. That's the second half of that thought, which is not usually quoted. So by quoting half of it, sometimes they hope to fool a Muslim to say, look, your book says, read my book, it's true. It doesn't say that.